everybody. Welcome to the Rope of Hope Season 3. We're going to call it 3.1 because I started Season 3 and then I got sick. But I am back and I have missed you all so much and I am so happy to be back. I have so many amazing people that I'm going to be bringing on this season. But to kick this season off, I have an amazing guest in the backstage right now. I met her on Clubhouse and the work she does, you guys. Get your Kleenex ready. This is your warning now. This is like any trigger warning I could give you. Get your Kleenex ready. If you struggle with anything related to domestic violence or anything of that nature, this may not be the episode for you. I do not want to trigger anybody in any way, so I am putting that out there as your heads up right now. However, I really do encourage you, if you can, push through and listen to this episode because the work that Thea is doing is amazing. This episode is called The Warrior for a reason. But before we get started, if you guys have enjoyed what I've brought you over the years, if you want to help support what I'm doing, please go over to buymeacoffee.com/thisfatgirllife. Now, that is kind of my Patreon, so to speak. That's where you can find out different things that are happening across all of my podcasts. You can do one-time donations to support me, or you could become a member. It's $5 a month, cheaper than Starbucks. And you guys already know I live on coffee. Coffee is my lifeblood. So it's only fitting that you buymeacoffee.com/thisfatgirllife. So for today, I have the wonderful, the beautiful Thea Eskey with me. Thea, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so glad we were finally able to connect. Like I said, you and I connected on Clubhouse, before Christmas, I think.
Probably, yeah, about then.
And it's now almost May. We're finally getting you on the show. But I have heard this woman speak on Clubhouse so passionately about what she does. And I have been brought to tears almost every time I hear her speak. Like, she touches my soul in a way that I didn't know it needed to be touched. So you guys just buckle in because I guarantee she is about to touch your soul the same way she touched mine. But before we talk about the work you do, why don't we talk about you? Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Thea Eskey. I'm a journalist, and I do the majority of my work on issues relating to public health and government corruption with a focus on the Los Angeles County child abuse crisis, which is where I'm currently based.
Okay, so I guess I'm kind of going to jump right on in here. What got you started in this? Where did your drive come from?
So I think it's a couple different things. I think the earliest thing for me is I had been instilled in me pretty early through my mom that to be of service to other people. One of the earliest things she did for me and my brother, and I give her all of the credit for this because, you are a product of how you're raised, and I see that a lot in the cases that I deal with, but also in my own life, I know that I'm a product of how I was raised, and some of my earliest memories are going to the Whole Foods in a town over from me every week, picking up a shipment of bread and delivering it to a food pantry. And we did that for about 13 years. And so that sort of instilled in me sort of the desire to do something that makes a difference for people. And pretty much every job I've ever had has done that in some capacity, big or small. So I would say that's probably the seed of it. And then it's a little bit complicated how I ended up in journalism. I had been writing for about 10 years before I ended up in journalism, and I was in entertainment writing. And what I realized through obviously all the Me Too stuff that came out, which had an element of journalism in it. And so I think that definitely also was in the back of my mind. But what I realized is that what I thought, and I've said this in the clubhouse as well, but what I thought I was going to do to make a difference, because I thought you could get into the entertainment industry and you could develop enough of a platform to make a difference. And so obviously what I thought it wasn't necessarily what it was. And then thankfully, I guess, although it was terrible for everybody, but thankfully for me, the pandemic happened and that sort of forced all of us to just stop. And in that stop, I was really able to sort of take an inventory and sort of think about what I wanted to do. And I made a whole list, and I still have that list to this day. And on the top of the list, the thing I wrote down was do a job that makes a difference. And so that was one part of it. And then the second part of it is during the pandemic, we were all watching Netflix. And there was a Netflix documentary called The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez that came out in 2020. And I watched that.
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah. And it was a big deal at the time. And I definitely recommend it for people that want to get sort of like an overview of the work that I do. Obviously, mine is a little more detailed because I'm working on a book and I have a lot more time to sort of really dig into the issues. But I would say for people wanting to really understand the magnitude of the problem in Los Angeles County, that documentary provides a great overview. And so that was really sort of the second, I guess, branch on the tree. And then the third branch was in 2021. I was able to attend a memorial service for Gabriel Fernandez, who was the child at the center of the Netflix documentary. And I was able to attend a memorial for him. And then I called my mom after and I said, there's a story to be told here and I want to get into journalism. And that was the inciting action of the last 2 years of my life. And I've been full steam ahead since then. So it's really just, I would say, a couple little prods along the way. And then I've only been doing this 2 years and it seems like 10, but I've been full steam ahead.
I think that we kind of get into that because I'll be honest, before I even started podcasting, like I thought I was going to be a life coach. That's what I invested in for an education, as an adult. And I've taken all that training and put it into a totally different arena. So I get that whole, you think it's going to happen one way and it switches. But I do remember that documentary. I think I've watched part of it even.
Yeah, so for people that don't know,
I'm not sure though, but I did pin it on the screen.
For people that don't know, it's about an 8-year-old boy named Gabriel Fernandez who lived in Palmdale, California, who was tortured and abused and eventually murdered by his mother and her boyfriend over a period of 8 months. And the documentary also tracks the systemic failures that the government, the county government, DCFS, and the county government of Los Angeles made in Gabriel's case, and how that sort of informs the larger view of the welfare system in America. So it's definitely, like I said, it's definitely a good overview of the problem in Los Angeles County, and also is a good overview of the work I do. And obviously, I'm happy to go into more detail about the work I do as well. But
yeah, I definitely would love if you would do that. Let's kind of walk us through the process of the work you do, just as on a hypothetical case.
yeah, so what usually happens is I usually get, so I have about 5 now because I just had a case finish. I had a case finish on Tuesday. There was a sentencing hearing for another boy named Anthony Amalos, who was 10 years old, and he lived about 15 minutes away from Gabriel Fernandez in Lancaster, and he was also tortured and murdered over a period of 2 weeks by his mother and his boyfriend, and they dehydrated him, starved him, and beat him to death. So I recently just finished that. They were sentenced to life in prison, which obviously I didn't think they wouldn't be. But I'm grateful for the family that they can put that behind them, the trial, and that they can start to heal. And as they've said a couple of times, put the puzzle pieces back together, because I think what's important for people to really understand about this is that this is never going to be okay for these family members. They're just finding ways to sort of, like they keep saying, put the puzzle pieces back together and get on with their lives. And so that finished recently, but a typical case, usually I'll find out about it from a source of mine. He's a prosecutor. He was also featured in the Netflix documentary as well. His name is Jonathan Hitami, and he works in the complex child abuse unit in the district attorney's office. And I think that's also important to highlight, that we have so many complex child abuse cases and child murders and child tortures, that there's a whole unit within the district attorney's office specifically designed to try those cases. I think that speaks pretty loudly to the problem in Los Angeles and how little people care about fixing it, that we have a whole unit in the district attorney. But I met him pretty early on actually in this. And so what will usually happen is he'll usually let me know, or I'll find out about a case. I was in a preliminary hearing for another case, and I found out about a case that I'm covering now. And so it all sort of, it either comes through him or it comes through just finding out the information for myself. And then what happens is I'll go from as early on in the process as possible. So there are preliminary hearings in California, which it sort of depends on the state, but some states have a grand jury system. Some states have a preliminary hearing. California has preliminary hearings. And so I'll go to those. I'll go to all of the hearings throughout the pendency of the trial, all of the pretrial hearings, all of the motion stuff. And then obviously go through the entire trial if I can. So I really try to go from beginning to end. And there are a couple reasons that I do that.
Okay, so I have a quick question, because I'm hearing you talk about this is kind of triggering a lot of stuff with me, because I am originally from Colorado. I just moved, relocated to Las Vegas, but in Colorado Springs, where I moved from during the height of the pandemic, we had a situation where a 7-year-old originally was listed as missing. They spent weeks trying to find this child, trying to find his body. Come to find out, they did eventually find the body in Florida. Stepmother was taken into custody. Stepmother, who claimed she knew nothing, was taken into custody because they had proof that she's the one that rented the car and took the body and everything else. Like, there is a mountain of evidence.
There usually is in these cases.
I'm seeing
unfortunately.
Well, I saw actually on someone's Facebook post. That's how I knew. And I read the stuff last night that it's just now finally going to trial. 3 years later. This woman's been in custody for 3 years because she was there on no bond, and they were doing psychiatric holds because she was playing games and stuff like that. Do you deal a lot with things that go for that many years?
Yeah, so just to give you some perspective, this case that just wrapped up on Tuesday, the death happened in 2018. So it's been almost 5 years. It happened in June, the end of June of 2018. So it's been almost 5 years. And then another case that I had that finished in 2022, he was finally sentenced in September of 2022. That case had been going on for 7.5 years. So these cases take time, and I think it's hard for the victims to really understand, because obviously it's just sort of like a sort of Damocles hanging over their heads, and they're really not sure why this is taking so long. But I think it's important, to remind people listening to this that we live in a unique system. We live in one of the few common law systems in the entire world, and that we live in a system where, for better or for worse, the defendant has certain rights. And I think I always try to tell people that I work with that I think it's better that it takes a little more time, as torturous as it is up front, because obviously you want to make sure that these cases are appeal proof. You want to make sure that these defendants can't get out on a technicality. And if that means taking extra time to cater to them, I think it's important. And I also think just for the good of the overall system that we maintain, which is one of the best systems in, which is one, in my opinion, obviously it's not without flaws. Every system needs to be reformed, but we have one of the best systems of justice in terms of just how it ideally is supposed to be delivered, where the defendant has equal rights. Like even in a place like Japan, right? They'll only try cases that they know they can win. They can detain you indefinitely. And so I would argue that they can detain you indefinitely before the trial. They don't have a bail system. And so I would argue that our system, at least as torturous as it is for people that are victimized, and I have a lot of sympathy for that, obviously, but I think I always try to tell them that we live in a system that has these rules, and I think it's better for them ultimately to know that the case was handled in a way that's effective, and that they won't have to come back a year later because something went wrong. Because just imagine going through this for 5 years, and then the appeals courts makes you retry the case. They have to go through all the testimony again, all the trauma again. And so I always try to tell people that it's definitely worth the wait. But
I
it is
can't
hard.
imagine going through it after you already feel like it's been handled.
Yeah, and it's hard. I'm not negating that at all. They have a right to feel how they do. It's hard to wait 7.5 years in this limbo state of not knowing if you're going to have to ever see the person that killed your child ever again, or be around them, or be like in the same atmosphere as them. And so I see both sides of it, but I do really honestly think that just for the good of the system and for the good of these victims, it should take however long it needs to take.
So I want to ask a question, and this is a question based solely on myself, because I know I am the person that I would hear so many of these cases, even the case that's back in Colorado that's now finally going to trial. I remember just feeling so much hurt for this young child's father and for his family. And you're there firsthand. How do you, I don't want to say decompartmentalize, but that I guess in my own mind, that's the only way that I could do it. How do you shut that off?
Yeah, so I think yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's a couple of different ways. I think for sure, compartmentalizing it, it's not necessarily inherently a negative thing. It doesn't mean that it doesn't affect me. It doesn't mean obviously like looking at hours and hours, because these are, you're looking at all of these pictures of children that are tortured, autopsy photos, bruises all over their face. In the case that just sentenced on Thursday, on Tuesday, sorry, we looked at photos during the trial, the literally from the top of this child's head down to like the bottom of their legs, bruising, cuts, scratches, cigarette burns, abrasions, like all over the body. And so it's obviously, I'm not saying compartmentalizing doesn't mean it doesn't affect me, because I think if it ever got to a point where I was like completely numb to it, I think you have to like bow out at that point, because that just is like a whole other problem. So it affects me, but I think I've done it long enough now to sort of know like where the limit is. So like I'll look at something once, because obviously I take notes, and in that trial I took I have these notebooks that are about 120 pages, and I filled 5 of them. So obviously I take notes. I have to look at it to get a sense of like what it is, but I also don't feel the need to like look at it every time, because a lot of times they put it back up. It's repetitive. A lot of these are used as exhibits in trial and have a purpose. In that repetitiveness, you're obviously trying to create a case, and you're trying to show a certain progression of this. And I understand all that, but I think for me, the first thing I do is know that I only need to look at it once. I don't have to like keep looking at it. And so that definitely helps. And then compartmentalizing it for me is just like figuring out a way to just be able to deal with it over on one side of my brain, so over on that side of my brain, and then focus on what I need to do over on the other side. I will say there have only been about 2 times where I've had a hard time compartmentalizing. And one of them was this case that I currently have, and it was when I just first got the case. It was a guy from Beverly Hills who beat his baby in a crib so badly, his 5-week-old baby in a crib so badly, that the baby is blind and has seizures and will be quadriplegic for the rest of their lives.
Oh my God.
And that affected me because it just reminded me a lot of how I grew up. I didn't grow up in the best environment. I grew up in a very abusive environment, but I also grew up in an environment not as privileged as Beverly Hills by any means, but I grew up in a privileged environment. And so I think that was hard at first just because it reminded me a lot of that. And what's specifically interesting about that case, there's two things. The first thing is that this was a guy who posted his bail, and usually bail in these cases is like $1 million, $2 million. And he posted $1 million bail, and I just think, and that really, I think it's so like it's so like mind blowing to me, because if you think about that, like this was a guy that had $1 million just lying around. If he took that
Yeah, just
$1 million
grab it
and
off the
hired,
money tree.
and he never ever would have had to touch that child ever again in his life. He could have literally like sent it to a boarding school. He literally could have hired 10 different people with that $1 million to never touch that child if he didn't want to. And so I think all of these are senseless, but I think that just to me is like, it just adds a whole other like layer on top of it, because it's just so, it's like senseless, and then it's senseless again, because you had the resources to never have to deal with this child if you didn't want to. You had to never deal with this child again if you didn't want to. And then it just reminded me a lot of how I grew up. And so that was hard. But then I had a friend that I was able to talk to about it, and they told me just to focus on just being there and just witnessing it, and not try to like absorb too much of it, and just try to, and that sort of helped me get back to a place where I could sort of compartmentalize how I personally felt about it, to deal with what was in front of me. And then the other case is a case I had recently of a 18-month-old baby who was, and this is like a classic domestic violence situation. The mom was dating the baby's father in St. Louis. He was abusing her, and she came out to California to get away from it, but then ended up inviting the abuser out because she didn't want to separate him from his child. They lived with the child's mother's wife, mom, for a while, and then the mom kicked them out. And I'm not entirely sure why, because this case is just starting the process. I just got this case recently, and it just went through preliminary hearings earlier this month. But from what I can gather, it seems like, probably, if I had to hazard a guess, probably what was happening was this person was abusing this mother's daughter in front of her, and so she didn't want that in her house, and so she ended up kicking them out, and they moved around to all these motels and hotels, and this was right in the height of the pandemic. And they ended up in a SRO, which is a single room occupancy hotel for people that are homeless. And it was in South Central, and then the abuse kept escalating and escalating and escalating, and then on July 13th, the mom went out to do errands, and while she was gone, this guy beat her baby to death, allegedly. So, and that was hard. Just that one was hard to compartmentalize, because I was in the preliminary hearing. The mom was there, and she was obviously very traumatized by it, and she was having a perfectly understandable trauma reaction. It was just hard because she was like here, and then I was just trying to focus on like what was in front of me, and so that was the other thing that was hard. And actually, there was a third time at this sentencing hearing, actually. One of Anthony's siblings, who was the 10-year-old who was abused, she was also abused, and she gave a victim impact statement where she basically said something to the effect of, "I wish I could have died instead of you, Anthony." And that was hard, because that's like she was probably like 10 to 13, and she had that much guilt, and that was hard. But I think the way that I deal with when things get hard is I just try to take it slow the day after, which basically means you don't try to do too much. You don't push yourself too hard. You just do what you need to do and get through it. And I try to organize it that way. I am also grateful because I can talk to my mom about it. And so having someone to talk to about it, obviously I try not to talk about it too graphically with her, but I talk about it. She's willing to let me talk about it enough that I feel like I can sort of deal with how it makes me feel, and like I can deal with the hardness of it, and I can have someone to talk to. So that obviously helps, because better than bottling it up inside, right?
Yeah.
And then the third thing is I just have other ways to decompress, other hobbies that I have, other ways that I have to decompress. And so all of that together, I think, helps me get through it. But It's definitely not easy. And then it's definitely not easy.
Oh, I easy, I think, is the last word I would use to describe the work you do. And if it ever became easy, might be time to find a new line of work.
Right. Well, it's never going to be easy too, because it's not only dealing with this that I have to deal with. I also have to deal with the other side of it, which is because the child abuse is the public health side. I also have to deal with the government corruption piece of it. And that piece of it, unfortunately, really drives a lot of the public health crisis. But it's also, when you're dealing with a corrupt system, the corrupt system has no incentive to change itself. And so um, it's a lot more. It's a lot more than just reporting on these. These aren't isolated incidents, right? And that's what I try to tell people. These are incidents that are a result of almost 200 years of systemic neglect and a lack of forward thinking and innovative thinking around how we conceptualize the welfare of children in America. So these aren't isolated, and so that's the piece I think that's hard more than anything. People ask me a lot, like, what is the hardest piece of this? And I always tell them, I think the hardest piece for me is, yes, I mean, it's hard to sit through these cases, I can't deny that, but that part I feel like is like, and it's, this isn't to be dismissive, but I feel like it's already kind of done, right? Like I can't necessarily do anything to fix what happened, right? I mean, a child is dead, for better or for worse. Like there's nothing I can do to make that,
Yeah,
like there's
there's
nothing
no
fixable
correct.
about that. There's no, it's tragic and awful, but there's nothing I can do to like make it less tragic and awful. I think the thing that bothers me is that, and I'm happy to go into this more, but I think the thing that bothers me the most is that we live in a first world state, and we live in a first world county in that first world state, Los Angeles County, California, and then we live in a first world country. And unfortunately, especially in California, it just really seems like people don't care. And that's, I think, hard for me because a lot of the policies that get put forward, recently I did an article about how the state of California decriminalized domestic violence. So they consider domestic violence. And I say that this is a completely factual thing. I mean, it's going to
Yeah.
sound like George Orwell, something out of 1984, but domestic violence in California is considered a non-violent, non-serious misdemeanor crime, despite the fact that violence is literally in the name. And that's not the only insane thing too that falls under that. For example, if you drug someone with the intent to rape them, that's considered a non-violent, non-sexual, non-serious crime, even though rape is a sex crime. And so I think for me, that's the part that's really infuriating, is that it just seems like is really the moral side of this is really, and it just seems like enough people don't care. And it seems like, and I think it's all sort of part and parcel of everything, but it just seems like enough people really don't care um, about showing up and making a difference. And that's why I'm grateful to work alongside people like the deputy district attorney that I mentioned, Jonathan Hatami, because he really cares and he's really in there. And if you think I'm a warrior, he's like an avenging angel. Like he's actually in the arena. I'm sort of a spectator, but he's like actually in the arena. He prosecutes these cases. Um, and that it makes you more grateful for people like that are really fighting to make a difference and that you're fighting alongside them. But he is the exception, unfortunately, and not the rule. And so I think that part of it is the hard part for me, is knowing how much suffering is happening and how little it seems that people care, uh, both the people that actually are part of the government and outside the government. It's hard to get people to pay attention to a lot of these stories, and that's why I'm grateful that you're having me on, because this is a chance to really get people to understand not only the complexity of these issues, but why it's important to talk about these issues and why it's important for everybody, not just the people that are affected by the system, to get engaged.
I definitely agree. So now this is going to sound like a very random question. And I know that, you are working, on a book and stuff. With doing the work that you do, how do you get paid?
So it's mostly freelance. So I publish on Medium, and that obviously pays you depending on the amount of engagement you get. I also work a ton of other jobs outside of it, freelance jobs. So I have a bunch of different freelance journalism jobs, and so just how anyone in my position keeps all the plates spinning. It's like being in a circus, right? You're just like spinning the
Oh, yeah.
plates.
On your Instagram and your Medium, do you have a link where people can help support you?
I don't know, but the best thing you can do is to share the stories, to convince people to subscribe, to follow me on Instagram. I'm not as active posting on there, but definitely as things come out, I try to post about them. And I would say would be the best thing that people can do. I think I need to get more. I think honestly, I need to get more aligned with like the Patreon side of things, or like I need to get more on that. But I'm trying to tackle one mountain at a
I
time.
trust. I know that. I know. I have done the battle. So I definitely understand that. So you guys, at this point, I'm going to encourage everybody who is watching this and or hearing this, go to Instagram, go to Medium, look up Thea Eskey, TheaEskey. Follow her, share the content that she's putting out, share the work that she is doing, put it in the forefront, because change is not going to happen unless people take action. You have to have an action to get a result. So let's help Thea with taking action. That is the best way right now to support her and to support the work that she is doing, because she's in there. She's in there in a way that I know I couldn't do. And so I commend you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
I I feel honored just to share space with you because of what you're doing and how important it is. I I'm moved by the work that you do. My heart breaks for the work that you do. And I don't know, I'm running out of words. I hate this.
No, it's okay. It's definitely tough, and I
Like I
appreciate
said,
it.
anytime I talk to you on Clubhouse, I'm like this. I should have been more prepared.
It's okay. I think vulnerability is good. I think this is a hard conversation, but it's a necessary one. And I always try to tell people that once you know the information, you can't unknow it, and that's what keeps me going for sure. But also, no action that you take to protect a child is too small, because in a lot of these cases, unfortunately, there are just so many missed opportunities to do the right thing, or to show up, or to really take that one tiny little extra step, like you were talking about with actions and taking that tiny action step. And so I just encourage people, now that you know this information, follow me. You can reach me over email too. You can reach me over email too. There's an email on my Instagram. Email me. I'll definitely respond. If you need any help, you can also email me as well, and that's on my Instagram. And just know that no action that you take to protect a child is too small, and that we need as many people, especially if you live in California, we need as many people as possible to get engaged, because unfortunately, for every John in the district attorney's office doing the work, for every me that's doing the work, there's so much suffering. And I would love to have a day where we can transform the welfare system, where we can make it so that I don't have to do the work that I do. I'll always do public health and government corruption, but I'm hoping I can get to a point where we can move on from this, that we can put this behind us. Because I'm going to tell you, the root cause is very simple. It's that we view children as labor. Everything, and that goes back to the 1840s. Everything in the intervening about 200 years is the metastasizing of that root problem. And the solution is just as simple as the root problem. You do the opposite. You view children as sovereign beings that deserve protection, and you prioritize their safety and well-being over viewing them as labor sources for the state. And so, as simply as I can communicate that to you, as simply as we can solve the problem, we just need to band together and understand that children, no matter where they come from, whether it's rich or poor, white, black, Asian, or any other thing that anyone thinks divides us, they deserve to be loved, they deserve to have protection, and they deserve a life free from abuse and neglect.
You could not have said the final words of this episode. I couldn't have said it better than you said it. That was the perfect words to close this episode. So with that being said, I want to thank you so much for coming on here. And now is time for that dreaded final question.
I'm ready.
That has absolutely nothing to do with what we've talked about. Because I've decided this season I am going to totally change the game on everybody.
You know me, I love a curveball.
What is your favorite animal and why?
That is a good question. I mean, this is going to sound kind of a little bit basic, but I think so. I have a couple. My favorite animal that's a little more basic is a dog, just because I think dogs are so loyal and they're so focused on you in a way that I don't think a lot of people necessarily are. And I'm no shade at all, but I just feel like dogs, like if you pour into them and you give them love, and I've seen that with my family dog, like they're so loyal, they're so loving, and they're so kind, and like they're attentive. Like my dog, he could always tell when I was like having a bad day, or anyone in the family was having a bad day, and he'd cuddle up. And then I think for like a non-basic sort of like exciting answer, it would have to be something like a zebra or something like that, just because it's flashy. And, you know, I'm kind of flashy myself. I describe my personal style as 60s meets 90s on 5 tabs of acid. So, you know, just like, I have an even better one. A peacock, you know, like all of the feathers and everything. That is me to a T. 60s meets 90s on 5 tabs of acid. You couldn't get anything better than a peacock.
Oh my God.
It's like a Lisa Frank serial killer vibe. That's me.
I love that. Well, Thea, I want to thank you again so much for coming on the show. I'm so glad that we finally were, able to connect and get you on the show. And I cannot imagine anybody else being a more perfect first guest for my relaunch of the show. After taking a year and a half off to deal with my health, you were the perfect first guest back. So thank you for helping me bring back the rope of hope with such, and you're an inspiration. What you do is inspiring. What you do is worthy. You truly are a warrior in every sense of the word.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Of course.
Because it's important to have platforms like this that are willing to have these tough but necessary conversations. That's the only way we can hopefully come together and deal with the problem. It's like that old expression, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I'm grateful for spaces like this that allow me to really talk about the work that I'm doing and help people understand why it's so important for not only me to be involved, but for them to get involved as well.
Definitely. And you guys go over to Instagram and to Medium, follow Thea, share, when she makes a post about different cases, share it. Bring light to what she is doing. Bring light to this stuff. That way we can work to correct it. And that way, hopefully we come to a time where she doesn't have to go into a courtroom and hear this stuff and see this stuff because it's not happening. That's the end game. Do I know if this end game is going to happen in our lifetime? No.
I
But
do.
that's the end game.
I do. It's totally possible. I can see that vision clearly in my mind, but it requires a complete, like I said earlier, it requires a complete reimagining of the system. But I can see that end game in my eyes. I can, because
And I'll be
understand the
honest,
entire thing.
they're, I normally don't talk politics, and I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna lean either way on, Republican versus Democrat or anything like that. But maybe it's time for a radical change in government altogether. Maybe that's what it's going to take to address some of these situations.
Maybe we need a go, because in Los Angeles, corruption is a feature, not a bug of the current political system. And so maybe we do need to change it, but that starts with all of us, especially in Los Angeles and especially in California, really getting engaged and really doing the important work of knowing who we're voting for, testing their values. And it's not political, it's a moral issue. To me, this is only political because we're talking about government. It's not political because these children are Republican or Democrat. No,
these children don't affiliate anyway.
These children don't affiliate, and they deserve protection, but we also deserve a government. We deserve a government that understands that protecting their citizens is its number one job. And if they can't do that, then there is no government.
Thank you. That is exactly where I was going with it. And I'll be honest, there are a couple people that I've been following on TikTok that are not career politicians, but they're seeing a lot of what needs to, a lot of the areas that need fixed within our society, within our government. And I got to tell you, I'm kind of getting behind some of their platforms. So maybe it is time for a radical change so that we can see the end game.
Well, I know that's coming in Los Angeles, especially again, it's not political, but the prosecutor I mentioned, he's running for district attorney. And if you're in Los Angeles, pay attention to him, because he is I can tell you from my experience, he cares, and he's not a politician. So everything that he represents is authentic and it's real, and it's what we need to change the course of child protection. This man has done the work. He's shown up. Again, I give him full faith and credit always, because without him and without his investment in me and without his investment in my work, it would be a completely different thing. I don't think I'd be able to achieve as much without him helping me and without him sort of cluing me in and helping me by being so open with me about, as much as he can, obviously, but as open as he is. And so definitely, if you're in Los Angeles, pay attention, because the district attorney is responsible for setting those policies for safety within that function of the government, within that function of government. And so definitely pay attention. But I will say change is on the horizon, but it also is incumbent on all of us not to get complacent. It is incumbent on all of us to be that change that we want. It's not enough for me to talk about change. We all have to engage.
And that, you know what? That is not just where, child abuse or violence, domestic violence cases are concerned. That is everywhere. When it comes down to it, in life, in general, you guys, be kind, be loving, don't be judgmental, be accepting of others, and just show care and compassion. It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy. Thea, I want to thank you again for coming on and for breaking my heart in the best way possible. I don't
Always my goal on a Friday.
I don't even know how else to word it. My heart is broken, but it's also inspired. So it's been an inspirational heartbreak. That's the only way I could word it. Maybe I'm coining a new phrase here.
Maybe.
Inspirational heartbreak. Because that heartbreak is what's going to help propel the positive changes that we need. So I hope if you have listened to this, if you've watched it, that your heart has broken as well. And that you want change. And that you want a better tomorrow. For you, for others, and especially for children.
Especially for children. Because they need us more than ever. They don't have anyone to protect them other than adults, and their entire life outcomes are dependent on us. So, especially children.
Well, you guys, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Thea, thank you again for coming on here and for being that rope of hope for others, because that's what you are. You are everything that this podcast is you. You are a prime example of why I have created this podcast. So thank you for being that rope of hope for so many others out there. You guys make sure that you are following Thea on Instagram and on Medium. Again, if you want to support me and what I'm doing, buymeacoffee.com/this fat girl life. I've got some amazing guests coming on this season, some possibly controversial guests. Also, make sure that you are at least following me on Buy Me a Coffee, because there's about to be some tea spilled over there, and you want to make sure that you are in on it. That's where I put stuff first, and there is some new stuff coming. So make sure, get your tea ready. To quote Jolly Ginger, the Jolly Ginger guy on TikTok, I'm not even going to claim that quote. That is his quote. Get your tea ready, because it's coming. And I will see y'all on the next episode.
Bye,
Guys,
everyone.
thank you. Mwah. Bye.